This is a clip from The Ancient Gift. The full episode is available free on all podcast platforms. You can click the link in the description and access the full episode now.
I remember when I was growing up and evolution was taught in school, and it was like, okay, there's a trunk and a branch, and we don't know where the common, thread is for humans and, primates, right? That was like the theory. Now we know it's a raging bush. There's branches all over the place. Yeah. And hominids lived at, the same time, different times, and they interbred. And so who knows, right? We don't know. But That was one of the questions I actually have for both of you. Do you think the giants are responsible for all the major monoliths, like, let's say, the pyramids of Giza or the pyramids in South America or Machu Picchu, or, these kinds of structures that have no explanation of how they were built? They were just, they have no way of redoing it in the exact way that it was done by the ancients, but also how would a typical 5'5" man, let's say, or woman, be able to build these monument structures all over the world? Anyone of you want to take that?
He'll take it.
So I think that they may be responsible for some of what we see, not everything. I think, man, you got to give us some credit. You put enough of us together and get the right minds behind it, and we're capable of doing quite a bit. I know that Greg touched upon this a little bit earlier, but you got to think when way back in the timeline, these giants, whether I like to call them sometimes men of great stature, they were larger, much larger than what we could imagine or fathom. But as time went by, and whether it was through catastrophic events or whatever, they were forced to, maybe mate with Homo sapien, and this hybrid process occurred with the reduction in size, which we see, through the timeline. So I think that the older build at some of these sites, there's a possibility that there was involvement of people of greater stature at the time, because maybe the technology wasn't available. Maybe it wasn't necessary, because if the individuals were large enough, they would have been able to, process larger volumes of rock and stone and quarry it and move it. The tools that they would have been using would have been much larger. You got to think about all these things. Look at the flora fauna. It was mega flora fauna that they were probably involved with as well around there. So were they able to, instead of using a regular pachyderm as we know, use a larger creatures as a mastodon, things of this nature. So to answer your question, I could see it in some of the builds, some of the megalithic structures, and then others I would be hesitant to say were all created by giants. I would think man, was capable of doing a lot.
I want to stay a little bit in South America just for a moment, if you don't mind. Now, I've read a lot of information, and I've been fascinated as well with the Paracas skulls, which I'm sure you're familiar with, being that you've done a lot of research in South America. I know it's Peru, really, but these skulls are considerably larger than a typical human skull, and they're elongated. Do you think, and there has been talk with different, people, that researchers have different theories that perhaps they are related to giants per se. Do you believe that could be true, or do you think it's a totally different subject? Jim?
Yeah, so I don't think they were related to giants for two reasons. First being, when you look at the structure of them at the base of the skull, it didn't look like it was capable of supporting that type of girth lower down into the torso system. Another thing is, I really believe that when you're looking at something like the Paracas skulls, that you really have to take into account the lack of sutures or the correct suture pathways through the skull, because that would be something that I would really want to investigate further than just taking people on their word as to having
Yeah,
this or
yeah, I agree. But I've seen a lot of evidence with different documentaries and research I've done, and it is pretty incredible that they're so much larger. Their eye cavities seem to be larger and they're elongated. It doesn't seem to be because they bound them. It's like the sagittal sutures are not there. So I just didn't know, you don't know. Things can be related in history, and different researchers have different opinions or different research. So I wanted to see what your thoughts were, since you specialize in South America.
Can I mention the Paracas skulls a minute? One of the issues with them is with the genetics that's been done on them. And you'll hear some people say it's alien DNA. They have tested the Paracas skulls with what's called mitochondrial DNA. And what it is, it's impossible to go through it all here. We need hours to explain it. But basically, they have a mitochondrial DNA that's extinct today. It's simply an extinct variation. And I know that genetic researchers have found I don't even know the number now, 30 or 40 extinct variations of mitochondrial DNA. That doesn't mean that they weren't human. It doesn't mean they were alien. It simply means that that particular organelle in our body called the mitochondria, which is it's a vestigial bacteria that produces energy for us from glucose or sugar or carbohydrate, whatever you want to call it. But we have all of us have them. We get them from our mother. And there are roughly 32 major variations of it in living populations. But when they have looked at ancient DNA, which is when you take bones and you extract the mitochondrial DNA and look at it, it is different and it's simply extinct. That variation of it no longer exists. I do want to show, I'd forgotten I have this. This is a picture of giants met by Magellan.
Mm-hmm. I saw that online, yeah.
Okay, and there's another one that's very interesting. This is Lord Byron's depiction when he met them there in Patagonia. It's kind of hard to do.
I can see. And what about Captain Cook? Didn't he at Easter Islands, the Mohais, the people, didn't he say there were giants on the island as well?
I don't know that anybody ever saw giants there. Jim may know, but I don't think anybody ever saw giants. I know it's a mythology there. And as far as I know, all Native American tribes have mythology of giants. All of them do, one way or another.
Now, both of you have done a lot of research, obviously, into this. You've written books and, anthropology. You're a doctor. But I do have a question. Serpent Mound in Ohio. Do you think that that's a giant burial tomb or mound?
I can say this: I don't think that's a giant burial mound with giants. However, if you go about a mile away from Serpent Mound, there's a whole bunch on farms. There are a whole bunch of conical burial mounds. Conical mound is like the top of an ice cream cone, a rounded mound. They're almost always Adena in the era. And they usually have a tomb at their base. Sometimes it's a stone tomb, sometimes it's a log tomb. But near Serpent Mound, several 7-footers were recovered in the 1800s. That's not in dispute in the literature. It's just that mainstream archaeologists today believe they were overestimating the size even when they were measuring them. So that I know. There are some burial mounds right by Serpent Mound. And I know those have been excavated, but I don't think they were not the ones that had the 7-footers in them. If I'm wrong, Jim will correct me.
No, you're right. And it's interesting, too, the way that they created these burial locations are a lot like what we hear from the Nuragic culture that was in Sardinia. I
was just going to ask you about that.
there was a similarity with these hypogeums and other types of single burials, the way that they were conical shaped or circular. So we see these similarities with such a great distance, and it just is another, piece of the phenomenon in regards to origin or how great of a distance they actually covered. Were they seafaring or other to have gotten there? What was their involvement with, mining and operations that were being brought back from, the Americas over to what's currently Europe area. So yeah, there's all these tie-ins, and it's just extremely interesting. Through the mythology or the oral traditions, which seems to be one of the very few ways left of being able to track this, since so much has been destroyed in the past.